In late 2024, a quiet shift unfolded on the global stage. A shift so significant it should have sparked breaking news alerts on every major outlet, yet most people didn't even notice. While social media obsessed over celebrity gossip and election drama, a handful of the world's most influential economies signed off on a series of currency agreements that signaled something larger than a trade strategy. It signaled the beginning of the end of a monetary era that shaped life in the West for nearly a century. For decades, the dollar wasn't just a currency, it was the backbone of global trade, the silent force behind America's prosperity, and the invisible hand keeping other nations tied to the U.S. financial system. But today, that foundation is cracking, not all at once, but piece by piece, deal by deal, policy by policy. What's happening right now follows a pattern older than America itself, a pattern that destroyed the reserve currencies of Portugal, the Netherlands, and Britain. Each believed their dominance was permanent, right up until the moment it wasn't. And whether people want to accept it or not, the dollar is now sliding into the same sequence, the same cycle, the same final chapters, not because of a single event, but because of a chain reaction years in the making. If you zoom out far enough, you can actually see the fall forming. You can see the stages taking shape, the rise, the peak, the overreach, the competitors, the alternatives, the cracks, the acceleration, and the replacement. And if history is consistent about anything, it's that once a reserve currency reaches the later stages of that cycle, nothing, not politics, not military might, not public opinion, can stop what comes next. That's the uncomfortable truth hiding behind the headlines the world ignores. For most of modern history, people assumed the dollar's strength came from the size of the U.S. economy, but the real source of power came from global dependence. Nations didn't just want the dollar, they needed it. It was the passport to buy oil, settle trade, access markets, and plug into a global financial system designed in America's image. That system created a cycle that felt permanent to anyone living inside of it. But reserve currencies have a lifespan, a rhythm, a predictable arc. After 80 to 110 years, they peak, stagnate, weaken, and decline because the conditions that made them dominant don't last forever. Competition rises, debt rises, military commitments expand, confidence wanes, and slowly the world prepares alternatives. You don't feel the decline day to day. You don't feel it at the grocery store or the gas pump, at least not at first. But beneath the surface, the pillars that propped up the currency begin to loosen. Trade deals shift, alliances evolve, financial institutions diversify, and when the right combination of economic stress and political tension arrives, the shift happens faster than anyone expects. For nearly 50 years, the dollar enjoyed a unique force multiplier: global energy pricing. Oil producers needed dollars because buyers needed dollars, and buyers needed dollars because producers demanded them. This closed loop created automatic global demand for U.S. currency and, by extension, U.S. debt. It kept borrowing cheap. It kept inflation manageable. It kept the American lifestyle inflated. But no loop lasts forever. In the last few years, major exporters quietly started invoicing a portion of their oil and currencies outside the dollar, not enough to dominate trade, but enough to signal a new direction. Some did it for strategic independence, some for geopolitical repositioning, and others simply because the global financial landscape became multipolar. Once energy pricing becomes flexible instead of mandatory, every other sector follows. This doesn't kill the dollar, but it weakens the gravitational pull that made the dollar unavoidable. Every reserve currency before the dollar followed the same trajectory. In the age of empires, Portugal's dominance rested on control of the spice routes. When its empire overextended and rivals built better ships, better networks, better financing, the Portuguese currency slipped, not overnight, but steadily, predictably. The Netherlands followed with a financial system so advanced it dominated trade for decades. But wars drained its treasury, competitors rose, and eventually London outgrew Amsterdam. The British pound, once convertible directly to gold, led the world into the early 20th century. But two world wars, massive borrowing, and rising American industry broke its dominance. In each case, the leading power insisted it would remain at the top, even as the evidence pointed in the opposite direction. And that's where the US finds itself today. Not in collapse, not in chaos, but in a late-stage transition that always feels invisible to the people living inside it. The warning signs come slowly. Falling reserve share, rising alternatives, strained alliances, rising debt costs, declining industrial base, and increasingly aggressive use of sanctions, the very tool that accelerates the push for alternatives. When a currency becomes a weapon, global partners eventually hedge against it. That doesn't happen because they hate the dominant nation. It happens because they fear dependence. Dependence means vulnerability, and vulnerability pushes nations to seek insulation. Over the past decade, the creation of parallel financial systems quietly accelerated. Alternative payment networks, interbank systems, and direct settlement lines formed between nations that historically relied on the dollar as an intermediary. These systems don't replace the dollar, not yet, but they reduce mandatory dependence. The more nations conduct trade in their own currencies, the more normal non-dollar pricing becomes. And once non-dollar pricing becomes normal, the psychological barrier drops. This marks the beginning of what history calls the critical mass stage, the phase where alternatives grow faster than the dominant currency can maintain its position. This stage doesn't look dramatic on the surface. You won't see headlines saying, "dollar era ending." Instead, you see a collection of subtle moves, a bilateral deal here, a new trading block there, a payment system upgrade, a diversification in reserves, a gold purchase by a central bank that historically preferred US bonds. One or two of these mean nothing. Dozens of them over a 10-year period mean everything. When global confidence shifts from "we must use it" to "we can use alternatives," the momentum flips. And once it flips, history shows that the decline accelerates exponentially, not because nations panic, but because they adapt. America's financial strength rested heavily on the ability to issue debt cheaply. Global demand for dollars meant global demand for U.S. Treasury bonds. As long as the world needed dollars, America could borrow at extraordinarily low rates and use those funds to fuel growth, wars, welfare programs, infrastructure, financial bailouts, everything. But as alternatives rise and dollar reserve share declines, the demand for treasuries isn't as automatic as it once was. When demand slows, borrowing costs rise. When borrowing costs rise, deficits grow faster. And when deficits grow faster, the nation prints more money to cover the gap. This cycle doesn't destroy the currency immediately, but it erodes confidence steadily. In every historical case, the dominant power believed it could outprint the problem because previous generations got away with it. But each time, the conditions were different, and the global economy eventually recalibrated. Today, the U.S. faces challenges the previous reserve powers didn't: larger debt loads, faster global communication, digital financial transfers, multipolar trade alliances, and a global population that has seen how quickly reserves can be frozen with modern sanctions. This doesn't mean nations are hostile to the U.S. It means they're adapting to a world where dependence on any single currency is a liability.